The morning sun cast a gentle glow over the rolling countryside, where a majestic horse named Thunder roamed freely. Thunder, a powerful yet gentle animal, had long been admired by the locals for his intelligence and loyalty. Though he lived on a nearby farm, he was known for wandering into town, often greeted warmly by the community. Nearby, the small-town hospital hummed with quiet activity. Inside, a young nurse named Evelyn moved through the sterile corridors, her steps purposeful but her heart heavy. It was a somber day, one where difficult decisions loomed over the lives of the patients she cared for. One case in particular weighed on her, an infant, frail and fighting, who had been brought in weeks ago. Despite their best efforts, the medical team had been unable to stabilize the child. The prognosis was grim, and the family had made the heartbreaking choice to cease further interventions. Outside the hospital, autumn leaves swirled in the crisp air, and life in the town seemed to move forward without pause. But inside, the atmosphere was heavy with unspoken grief. Evelyn took a deep breath, steadying herself as she prepared to carry out her duties. The infant's tiny room was dimly lit, a quiet sanctuary amidst the busyness of the hospital. As Evelyn approached, she felt the familiar pang of helplessness. Despite all her training, there were moments when love and care could not conquer fate. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of town, Thunder grazed near the edge of the hospital grounds. His owner, an elderly man named Arthur, often let him wander within safe limits, knowing the horse had an uncanny ability to navigate without getting into trouble. Thunder had a reputation for sensing when something was wrong, often appearing unexpectedly at just the right moment. Arthur called it intuition. Others simply called it miraculous. As the morning unfolded, Thunder lifted his head, his ears twitching as though catching a sound no one else could hear. His usual calm demeanor shifted. He stomped a hoof and whinnied softly, a sound filled with urgency. Without hesitation, Thunder began to move toward the hospital, his powerful strides deliberate and unyielding. Back inside, Evelyn sat beside the infant's crib, her hand gently brushing the baby's tiny fingers. The child stirred faintly, their fragile breaths filling the room with a rhythm that seemed both hopeful and heart-wrenching. Evelyn whispered softly, words of comfort that felt inadequate in the face of such overwhelming sorrow. Suddenly, the sound of commotion broke through the quiet. Startled, Evelyn stood, her heart racing as she heard gasps and hurried footsteps in the hallway. "What's happening?" she called out, stepping toward the door. Before anyone could answer, a powerful presence filled the corridor. Thunder, his mane slightly tousled from the breeze, stood in the entrance, his large, dark eyes scanning the room. Nurses and staff froze, unsure of how to react to the unexpected visitor. The sight of a horse inside the hospital was beyond anything they could have anticipated. Evelyn's breath caught as she met Thunder's gaze. There was something almost knowing in his eyes, a sense of purpose that defied explanation. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, the usual order of things suspended in the face of this extraordinary event. Thunder's attention shifted, his gaze falling on the infant's room. Without hesitation, he began to move forward, his hooves clicking softly against the polished floor. The hospital staff exchanged bewildered glances, unsure of whether to intervene or let the moment unfold. Evelyn, her instincts guiding her, stepped aside, allowing Thunder to enter. Inside the room, the baby lay still, their breaths shallow but steady. Thunder approached the crib with a gentleness that seemed impossible for a creature of his size. He lowered his head slowly, his warm breath brushing against the baby's fragile skin. The child stirred, a faint murmur escaping their lips as Thunder stood vigil, his presence filling the room with an unspoken sense of hope. Evelyn watched in awe, her heart pounding as the scene unfolded before her. She couldn't explain what was happening, but something deep within her told her that this moment was significant. Thunder, this remarkable animal, had stepped into their lives at a time when hope felt like a distant memory. The staff gathered at the door, their faces a mix of disbelief and wonder. Arthur, having followed Thunder's unexpected journey, arrived moments later, his expression one of both surprise and understanding. "He's always had a way of knowing," Arthur said quietly, his voice filled with pride. "I think he's here for a reason." Evelyn turned to Arthur, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "It's like he knows," she whispered. "It's like he understands what's happening." Thunder remained by the crib, his large frame radiating the warmth and calm. In that moment, it didn't matter how or why he was there. What mattered was the undeniable sense of connection he brought with him. The infant stirred again, their tiny hand moving as though reaching for something unseen. The room was silent, save for the rhythmic sound of the infant's breaths and the faint rustle of Thunder's mane as he stood by the crib. Evelyn couldn't take her eyes off the scene before her. The horse, so imposing yet so gentle, had brought an unexplainable energy into the room. It was as if his presence had shifted the air itself, filling it with a warmth that softened the tension lingering in every corner. Arthur remained near the doorway, his hands resting on the frame as he watched Thunder. "He's always been drawn to places where he's needed most," Arthur said softly. "But I've never seen anything like this." Evelyn nodded, her voice trembling with emotion. "It's like he knows. It's almost like he can feel what's happening." The infant stirred again, their tiny fingers twitching slightly as Thunder lowered his head further, his soft breath brushing against the child's fragile form. Evelyn's heart raced as she leaned closer, watching for any sign of change. The baby's breathing, which had been labored and shallow for days, seemed to deepen, their chest rising and falling with newfound strength. Across the room, one of the doctors stepped forward, his expression a mixture of skepticism and awe. "What's happening here?" he asked, his tone cautious but curious. Evelyn turned to him, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions within her. "I don't know," she admitted, "but something is different. Look at the baby. There's a change, their breathing. It's stronger." The doctor frowned, stepping closer to the crib to observe. He checked the infant's vitals, his brow furrowing as he noted the slight improvements. "This doesn't make sense," he murmured, glancing at Thunder. "But I can't deny what I'm seeing." Thunder stood still, his large, soulful eyes never leaving the baby. There was something about his presence that felt purposeful, as though he had come not by chance but by a force greater than anyone could understand. Evelyn reached out to place a comforting hand on his neck, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you," she said softly. "Thank you for being here." Arthur, still watching from the doorway, smiled faintly. "He's always been more than just a horse," he said. "Somehow, he knows when to step in, even when the rest of us don't." Word of the unusual scene spread quickly through the hospital. Staff members gathered outside the room, their murmurs filling the hallway as they tried to make sense of what was happening. Thunder, undisturbed by the growing crowd, remained focused on the child. His calm presence seemed to envelop the room, creating a sanctuary of hope amidst the uncertainty. As the minutes passed, the baby's condition continued to stabilize. The doctor, who had initially been hesitant, ran further tests, his amazement growing with each result. "This is unprecedented," he admitted to Evelyn. "The baby's vitals are improving. It's almost as if they're responding to him." Evelyn felt a lump form in her throat as she looked at Thunder. "He's giving them something we couldn't," she said quietly. "Hope." The parents, who had been in another room grappling with the weight of their decision, were brought in by the nurse. Their faces were etched with exhaustion and sorrow, but as they stepped into the room and saw Thunder, their expression shifted to one of disbelief. "What's going on?" the mother asked, her voice trembling as she approached the crib. She froze when she saw her baby, their tiny hands moving faintly, their breathing steadier than it had been in weeks. "They're stronger," Evelyn said, her voice filled with emotion. "It's as though something, or someone, gave them the strength to keep fighting." The father looked at Thunder, his jaw tightening as tears filled his eyes. Is this real?" Arthur stepped forward, his voice steady and kind. "It's real," he said. "Thunder doesn't come somewhere without a reason, and right now, his reason is your child." The mother knelt beside the crib, her hands trembling as she reached out to touch her baby's small hand. A tear rolled down her cheek as she turned to Evelyn. Does this mean we don't have to let go?" Evelyn's voice broke as she responded. "It means there's hope," she said. "And hope is the strongest thing we have." Thunder let out a soft whinny, as if to echo Evelyn's words. The baby stirred again, their small hand reaching out as though seeking the comfort that Thunder's presence had brought. The room was filled with an unexplainable energy, one that transcended logic and spoke directly to the heart. Outside, the autumn leaves continued to fall, their quiet descent mirroring the steady return of life to the infant in the crib. The hospital staff, the parents, and even Evelyn herself stood in awe of what they were witnessing. A moment that defied explanation, one that would forever be etched in their memories. The baby's steady improvement left the room in a state of hushed awe. Thunder stood unwavering, his presence an unspoken reassurance, as if he were channeling something greater than himself into the fragile life before him. The parents clung to one another, tears streaming down their faces as they watched their child stir with newfound strength. Evelyn glanced at the monitors, her heart leaping as the baby's oxygen levels climbed steadily. It wasn't just a flicker of hope anymore, it was a tangible, undeniable change. This isn't just chance," she murmured to herself, her voice trembling. It's like something shifted the moment Thunder walked in. The doctor, who had been skeptical just hours before, now stood in silent reverence. "We need to run more tests," he said, his voice filled with cautious optimism. "But whatever is happening, it's beyond anything I've seen." Thunder lowered his head again, his breath warm and steady as it brushed over the baby's small form. The infant responded with a faint cry, the first sound of its kind since arriving at the hospital. It was soft but full of life, and it sent a ripple of emotion through everyone in the room. The mother let out a sob, her hand covering her mouth as she knelt beside the crib. "That's the first time I've heard them cry," she whispered. "It's like they're fighting now." Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes as she turned to Arthur. "How does he know?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Arthur smiled gently, his gaze fixed on Thunder. "I don't know," he admitted, "but he's always had this gift. He's always been able to sense what others can't." The crowd outside the room had grown, word of the event spreading through the hospital like wildfire. Nurses, doctors, and even patients peered in with wide eyes, their disbelief mingled with hope. In a place often marked by clinical detachment, Thunder's presence had created something rare, a moment of collective wonder. As the minutes turned into hours, The baby's condition continued to improve. The once dim room now felt alive, the monitors humming steadily as they reflected the infant's newfound vitality. Thunder remained by the crib, his stance calm but resolute. It was as though he knew his work wasn't done yet. The hospital's chaplain arrived, drawn by the whispers of a miracle horse. She stood quietly in the corner, her hands clasped in prayer as she observed the scene. "There are moments," she said softly, "when the divine finds its way into our world through the most unexpected means." Her words resonated deeply with Evelyn, who had always believed in the power of science but now found herself questioning everything she thought she knew. How could she explain this? How could anyone? The parents, too overwhelmed to speak, simply stayed close to their baby, their fingers brushing over tiny hands and feet as they whispered words of love and encouragement. Their grief had been replaced with something they hadn't dared to feel in weeks: joy. As night fell, the hospital began to quiet down, but the buzz surrounding Thunder's presence lingered. Arthur, sensing the need for rest, stepped forward to guide the horse back outside. "You've done enough, boy," he said softly, placing a hand on Thunder's neck. "Let's give them some time." But Thunder didn't move. He remained by the crib, his gaze steady and unyielding. Arthur chuckled, shaking his head. "Stubborn as always," he murmured. "I suppose you know best." Evelyn knelt beside Thunder, her hand resting gently on his mane. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know how, but you've given this family something we couldn't. You've given them their child back." Thunder let out a soft whinny, his ears flicking as though acknowledging her words. Evelyn smiled through her tears, a profound sense of gratitude washing over her. In all her years as a nurse, she had never witnessed anything like this. A moment that defied explanation, rooted not in logic but in love. As the hours stretched into the early morning, the baby's transformation became undeniable. Their breathing, once shallow and labored, was now strong and steady. Their tiny fists clenched and unclenched as they stirred, their soft cries filling the room with a sound that was nothing short of miraculous. The mother turned to Evelyn, her face radiant with hope. Do you think they'll be okay now?" Evelyn nodded, her voice firm with conviction. "I do," she said. "Your baby has a strength we didn't see before, and I believe Thunder brought it out." Arthur finally coaxed Thunder to step back, the horse moving with a grace that belied his size. As he reached the doorway, Thunder paused, glancing back at the crib one last time. It was a look that spoke volumes, as if he were passing on the torch of hope to the family. Outside, the autumn night wrapped around Thunder like a cloak, the stars above shining brightly as if in celebration. Arthur patted his neck, his voice filled with pride. "You've done something incredible, old friend," he said, "and they'll never forget it." The morning light filtered through the hospital windows, casting a golden glow across the room where the infant now lay peacefully. The hum of the monitors was steady, reflecting the miraculous recovery that had taken place overnight. Evelyn entered the room quietly, her heart swelling with relief and disbelief as she watched the baby move gently in their crib, their tiny hands grasping at the air. The parents were seated beside the crib, their eyes fixed lovingly on their child. They looked up as Evelyn approached, their faces bright with gratitude. "They're stronger today," the mother said softly, her voice filled with awe. "It's like a different baby." Evelyn nodded, her heart full. "I've never seen anything like this," she admitted. "This kind of turnaround, it's extraordinary." The father glanced at the doorway where Arthur and Thunder had stood hours earlier. "That horse," he said, his voice tinged with wonder. He wasn't just here by chance, was he? Evelyn shook her head, a small smile tugging at her lips. I don't think so, she replied. Thunder came for a reason, and whatever it was, it worked. The hospital staff, too, buzzed with amazement at the baby's recovery. Nurses who had witnessed Thunder's quiet vigil shared their stories in hushed tones, while doctors pored over the infant's medical records, searching for an explanation. But no matter how much data they analyzed, the conclusion remained the same. Something beyond their understanding had taken place. Arthur, now back outside with Thunder, prepared to lead the horse home. The small crowd that had gathered to witness the event lingered, their expressions a mix of curiosity and reverence. Children ran up to pat Thunder's sleek coat, while adults whispered among themselves about the animal's uncanny intuition. "You're quite the hero," Arthur said with a chuckle, scratching Thunder behind the ears. "Not every day a horse saves a life." Thunder huffed softly, his eyes scanning the hospital as if ensuring his work was truly done. Arthur smiled, his heart swelling with pride. In all the years he'd known Thunder, he'd seen the horse do remarkable things, but today had surpassed them all. Inside, Evelyn returned to her station, her thoughts lingering on the events of the past day. She glanced at her colleagues, who were still buzzing with questions, and said softly, "Sometimes things happen that we're not meant to explain. We just have to accept them for what they are, a gift." The chaplain, who had stayed to pray with the family, approached Evelyn with a gentle smile. "You know," she said, "there's a story about St. Francis and how he believed animals were messengers of the divine. Perhaps Thunder is one of those messengers." Evelyn considered the words, her gaze drifting to the window where she could see Thunder grazing in the distance. Whether divine intervention or pure instinct, there was no denying the impact he had made. By the end of the day, the baby's condition had stabilized completely. The parents, overwhelmed with gratitude, asked to meet Arthur and Thunder to thank them personally. Outside, as the sun dipped low in the sky, they approached the horse with tears in their eyes. "Thank you," the mother said, her voice trembling as she reached out to stroke Thunder's nose. "You gave us back our child." Arthur smiled warmly, his hand resting on Thunder's neck. "He's always had a way of knowing where he's needed most," he said, "but seeing it happen like this, it's something I'll never forget." The father knelt beside Thunder, his voice thick with emotion. "You've shown us that miracles don't always look the way we expect them to," he said. "Sometimes they come on 4 legs." The moment was quiet but powerful, a shared understanding passing between the family and the horse. Thunder stood still, his gaze steady and calm, as though acknowledging their gratitude without needing words. As the family returned to the hospital, Evelyn watched from the window, her heart full. Thunder and Arthur began their journey back to the farm, the horse's powerful frame silhouetted against the setting sun. It was a sight she knew she would carry with her forever, a reminder of the extraordinary connection between humans and animals, and the unexplainable magic that sometimes graced their lives. Weeks passed, and the story of Thunder's extraordinary intervention became the talk of the town. People shared the tale in hushed awe, marveling at how a horse could seem to understand what so many humans couldn't. For the hospital staff, it was a moment that redefined their understanding of care, compassion, and connection. The baby, now growing stronger every day, became a symbol of hope for the community. The parents, once filled with despair, found joy in the small milestones. Tiny giggles, the grip of little fingers, and the sparkle of life in their child's eyes. They visited Thunder often, bringing small tokens of gratitude, apples, carrots, and the warmth of their heartfelt thanks. On a crisp autumn afternoon, the family returned to the farm where Thunder lived. This time, they brought the baby, bundled warmly in a soft blanket. Arthur greeted them at the gate, his eyes lighting up as he saw the little one. "Well, look who's here," Arthur said, his voice filled with affection. "Thunder will be happy to see you." The parents followed Arthur to the field where Thunder grazed, his coat glistening in the sunlight. The horse lifted his head as they approached, his ears twitching as though he recognized the baby's presence. Slowly, Thunder stepped forward, his large, gentle eyes scanning the child. The mother held the baby closer, a tear slipping down her cheek. "We wanted you to meet the one who saved you," she whispered, her voice trembling. Thunder lowered his head, his soft breath brushing against the baby's tiny face. The infant cooed, their small hand reaching out instinctively toward the horse. The moment was silent yet profound, a connection that needed no words. Arthur watched with a proud smile, his hand resting on Thunder's mane. "He has a way of leaving an imprint on everyone he meets," he said softly. "But this is something special." The father knelt beside Thunder, his voice thick with emotion. "We'll never forget what you've done for us," he said. "You've given us more than just time. You've given us a miracle." As the sun began to set, casting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, the family said their goodbyes, their hearts full of gratitude and wonder. Thunder watched them leave, his calm gaze following them until they disappeared from view. Arthur gently stroked his neck, his voice filled with pride. "You've done something amazing, old friend, and they'll carry this memory with them forever." Back at the hospital, Evelyn reflected on the events that had unfolded. The infant's recovery was now complete, the once grim prognosis replaced by hope and possibility. For Evelyn, the experience had been transformative, reminding her that the unexplainable moments in life often carried the greatest lessons. In her quiet moments, Evelyn often thought of Thunder. She couldn't fully understand what had happened that day, but she didn't need to. What mattered was the undeniable truth that love, in all its forms, had the power to heal. The family's story spread beyond the town, inspiring others with its message of hope and the extraordinary bond between humans and animals. For those who heard it, the tale of Thunder and the baby served as a reminder that miracles sometimes came in the most unexpected ways. If this story of courage, connection, and hope touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. Let's celebrate the extraordinary bond between animals and humans, and the incredible ways love can change our lives.